Welcome to week 2 of our exciting overhead press series. Last week we covered screening tools to know where you're at with your shoulder mobility. This week we build on that. This week we're looking at mobility drills to get you ready for pressing. We also look at exercises to regress your overhead press until we've built up to proper overhead mobility. So take a look, try it out.
So one of the warm-ups that we're going to demonstrate is a multi-angle band pull-apart. Dee has a lovely orange band. These are actually quite thick because Dee is a badass and quite strong, and she lives for passion apparently. So we're going to start with the band pull-apart with her palms facing down. We want to make sure that our rib cage is pulled down and our core is neutral and not flaring. We're going to keep those wrists aligned, and she's going to pull that band apart. You can see that she was trying to pump there a little bit, like a Spice Girl. You'll often see that actually in bodybuilding or warm-ups where people tend to push their rib cage out. We want to make sure that we keep our rib cage down so that we feel it more and we feel it better. Now she's going to show us a palm up band pull apart. Can you straighten those elbows a little bit more for me? Yeah. She's going to do a palm up pull apart. This is also another version of doing a pull apart, and we'll just change the mechanics slightly in your back. Next up, we're going to do an up and down version with our palms up. This is going to isolate a little bit more mid trap along with lower trap. Try the other side, Dee. Good, and we want to make sure that we keep those shoulders down, that rib cage down, so we get the maximum out of this warm-up possible. So the next you're going to see Dee demonstrating is a dowel passover. You'll often find these dowels in the nooks and crannies of a gym. Right now we're actually using a painting rod, which is a little bit short for Dee. You can actually see that one of her shoulders isn't quite happy, so you want to make sure that you have the right distance before you pick your dowel. So Dee's going to pass up and over without bending those elbows, and you can see she's working quite hard to keep those ribs down, shoulders down, but this is good. This is challenging her. This is what we want. Even coaches have things that they need to work on, and you can see that Dee is really working, and I love it. So next up, Dee is going to be demonstrating a corkscrew arm bar. So in this arm bar, she's going to be rotating forward and rotating back in order to get some isolation at the front of the shoulder and the back of the shoulder. This is a great warm-up for warming up your entire shoulder. You can see that she's in an arm bar position. She's watching the weight and making sure that it's not shifting forward or back. That's going to make it a lot harder if you're shifting the weight forward and back. Nice rotation, Dee. Ooh, yeah. Ooh, yeah. Next exercise that Dee is going to demonstrate for us is our half kneeling Y raise variation. She's going to put one foot forward, align her hips facing forward, her knees over her toes, and make sure that she's not hip dropping. This is going to make sure that you're actually engaging your hips and your core during your Y raise. This one is more challenging. She's going to use one arm to actually distinguish between the two arms to make sure that she has proper isolation of that one side. You can see that her ribs are not flaring up. You can actually try to increase the difficulty of this by bringing one arm up, one arm down, other arm down. This increases the difficulty, and you can actually see if you struggle more with one side versus the other. You want to make sure that you're not shrugging when you do this. You really want to suck that shoulder into its socket, which is going to help activate that mid trap, which is what we really need for an overhead reach. Our second category of mobility work is going to be the W raise. Dee is going to demonstrate our prone W to Y. She's going to first activate her core and get her hips aligned with her upper rib cage. Nice, flat, isolated. From here, she's going to keep her forearms in line with each other, completely parallel to the ground, avoiding the elbows coming above the wrists. It's actually better to have your wrists higher than your elbows in this case versus elbows higher. This is going to isolate your mid-back. From here, D is going to glide into a Y. She's going to keep those wrists, elbows, and everything neutral to each other and try to get those elbows to completely extend. This can be a challenge for some, so go in your range of motion and capability. What we want to avoid is shrugging here. We really want to suck that shoulder into its socket. She doesn't want to overextend into that low back, and she doesn't want to lift too high up off the ground. She definitely doesn't want to kink her wrists either, because that just looks awkward. Good, so gliding along the ground, you want to imagine that you're sweeping the floor upwards and downwards, holding your core, avoiding piking the elbows, and gliding upwards. So next up, we actually have a movement that is very similar to an animal flow movement called crab reach. So D is going to go from a bent knee reverse plank into a crab reach. From here, she's actually going to reach up and over her shoulder, getting a nice arc through her body. You can see that she's still aligning her ribs. She's reaching nice and tall and squeezing the glutes to get up. Try the other side for us, D. From the other side, you'll actually be able to see that she has to get quite a bit of extension through the upper back and stabilize through that shoulder, reaching overhead, getting a nice extension. So one of our regressions for training an overhead movement is actually going to be a downward dog. So D is going to demo for us what a downward dog looks like. You're going to go from a plank position into an overhead reach. This gives you immense stretch to your hamstrings. D is going to go in and out of that movement, trying to push and really get nice extension. You can see that she's struggling a little bit on that right hip with a little less mobility. So she's going to show us another variation that actually takes your hamstrings a little bit out of play. She's going to go from a bear stance into an overhead reach. This is a little easier on the hamstrings, but a little harder on the shoulders. Look at that nice thoracic extension that she's showing in her scapula. Can you do that one more time for me, D? What we want is this nice curvature here, where you can see lots of extension. Now she's actually learning how to stabilize while holding that extension. In this regression, we're going to be focusing on a landmine press. We've chosen half kneeling to actually take Cam's legs out of play here because a lot of people tend to use their legs in order to get into an overhead press and tend to arc their back. This is going to optimize his technical position. You want to make sure that the bar is not passing over your shoulder. You want to make sure that you're grabbing the end of the bar and that you're focusing on keeping a neutral straight wrist. There's a tendency to allow your wrist to dump, which actually can cause some harm to the wrist. We don't want that. We want a strong grip because that force actually transfers through the arm into the shoulder. Cam is allowing upward rotation of his scapula. That means that he's actually letting his scapula glide upwards and outwards as it goes out and packing and contracting that shoulder back in to counter the weight of the bar. You'll notice that he's not leaning, shifting, or anything. It is exclusively a shoulder movement here, and he's doing a pretty darn good job. In a landmine press, you're going to notice that there's actual movement happening mostly at the shoulder blades. So as Cam pushes forward, you'll actually see his scapula come around the side and push forward. This is called protraction. As he comes back down, he's actually going to set his shoulder to avoid a rotation forward and upward, which can actually put the shoulder at risk and get your traps to be overactive in the upper portion. So that is a drastic protraction. That's actually beyond what we want to do when we're doing a landmine press, but you do want to allow some movement happening at the shoulder. We don't want to keep that a packed shoulder. We want shoulder blades to move freely so that we don't have upper back pain. In this version, we use a band instead of a bar. So if you don't have a bar accessible to you because you're still working out at home, you can easily use a band to accomplish the same task. You can see here that Cam has attached the band to his foot and that he's actually holding the state of his shoulder to remind himself to keep that shoulder in check and to avoid over protracting when he presses. You can see this is actually almost harder because at the end range, it becomes more difficult. You'll also notice that the trajectory of resistance is slightly different than a bar. Since we're highlighting regressions of overhead press, This is also an even better way to regress your landmine press further if you don't have proper equipment or you're struggling with the position of returning to the beginning portion of this movement. The band will actually pull him into retraction and set that shoulder with him so that he can optimize that portion of the movement and focus on a stronger press, because at end range there is increased resistance and more force that he needs to apply. So Cam is going to demo for us an overhead kettlebell press. You'll notice that he's still in half kneeling and he is going in an upward trajectory with the kettlebell. You'll notice that he does come out a little bit. He's not directly next to his ear. When we go directly next to our ear, we tend to use more of our upper traps. We want to be able to use our lower to help stabilize that shoulder as well. You'll notice his wrist is also still straight, just like we did in the landmine press.
We're continuing our regressions for our overhead press with the incline press. This is a great option if you can't get your full range of motion for the overhead press. So we've got Cam set up with his barbell in a rack. It's really safe. We've got our catch bars, our hooks, right, so that he's not going to crush his ribs if he fails on his reps. But he never fails because he's Cam and he's unstoppable. So the rules that we're looking for our good form on our press here are that we have straight wrists. That way the barbell has a nice line of support underneath it when we're working. Then all the way through the movement, we have vertical forearms. So there's a straight line from his elbow to his wrist. He's not flaring that elbow out. He's not rotating his shoulders inward as he goes through. If you're having a hard time controlling that, try adjusting your grip on the bar. Going a little bit wider can give your shoulder a bit more space to clear the movement safely to get that straight up and down forearm. Way to go, Cam. So through this, yes, we're focusing on what the shoulders are doing, getting the shoulder blades sliding up and down the spine, but this is a full body exercise. So even though we're inclined on a bench, we still have to think about having our body position stacked. Ribs on top of the hips, abs are on, we're creating good tension from the floor, not just kind of letting the feet float around. To be able to control a heavy barbell when it's got a bunch of weight on it, we have to be firmly planted and grounded so we can control that bar. We don't want any tap dancing feet. Not right now anyway. That's for later. We're also creating torque with the bar. It's another way to get a good handle on your barbell when it feels like you can't keep it in position. And starting with the pinkies, to get this grip, we think about breaking the bar or screwing into the bar. So that's what Cam's doing, even though he's not twisting, because he can't break that bar as much as he wants to. He can't break it. It's going to give him good tension, and it's going to get support from all those small stabilizing muscles around the shoulder so he can really work that lift and build his strength up in it. Form counts. Form will get you everywhere. Unless you're Cam. So if you're feeling really comfortable with the angle of the press you have here and you've got all your checklist items down, we can work up to the next level. When we adjust the incline, you're going to be pressing a bit more vertically, and you might notice there's a bit of tightness going on. You might notice there's a bit of noise going on. You might notice there's a bit of tightness going on. And then you can get those mobility drills going, get yourself comfortable with that new range of motion that we're going to work on, then load it. All we've done is adjust the angle for Cam, so it's going to be challenging his shoulder and mobility a little bit more, but he's still going to follow that same checklist we just went over for our incline press and for our overhead press. Straight wrists, vertical forearms, core is on, feet are driving into the floor. He's creating torque by trying to screw the bar or break into the bar, and he's leading that with his pinky on his grip. Work it. Another overhead press variation we have is our incline single arm dumbbell or kettlebell press. So single arm is a great variation if you have discrepancies from one side to the other with your shoulders. And this could be just in terms of strength, but it could also be the way those shoulders move. For overhead presses, both shoulders aren't necessarily going to have the same range of motion. Could be for muscular reasons, could be for anatomy reasons that you can't even control. This single arm option gives us a great way to actually give that shoulder what it needs. So if we come away from that barbell where maybe one shoulder is doing a little more work than the other because of that position, this takes that away and actually helps you build real strength on both sides. Same rules apply. We're working straight wrist, vertical forearm, packing the shoulder and letting the shoulder blades slide up but without shrugging at the top. Core is on and engaged, so we're not letting the ribs flare up even though we're seated. Abs are on and we're planted firmly from the floor. We still want to create a firm grip on the kettlebell. Cam just died. Having a kettlebell or dumbbell and working one arm at a time is going to let you build on the strength that your arm needs to find and lets you work the range of motion that's safe for it. Dumbbell and kettlebell can be interchangeable. They will have slightly different effects. The kettlebell is going to be less stable, so it's going to be challenging the shoulder a bit more. The dumbbell is going to be pretty easy to stabilize, and you can really work that shoulder range of motion.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure that you try out those regressions and check out next week for overhead press.
And as always, like, share, subscribe, click the bell icon so you can keep seeing more of our YouTube stuff. Check us out on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, because we share little tidbits on there as well. And then go to Patreon, because you can get all kinds of fun stuff. You can get personalized programs from us. And then stay tuned for our next video. Thank you for watching and supporting us.